Well, these days I haven't been much of a sports player, but when I was younger, I grew up and I was into baseball quite a bit. It was through our T-ball team in baseball that my mom and dad came to their faith and brought us to the Lord and to the church. And baseball is really the one that I enjoyed the most. Although I did try other sports I still do enjoy sports sometimes, but not as much as I used to. But hockey was one that I've always wanted to enjoy, but people wonder, Jamie, you don't play hockey very much, and I don't. Actually, I had a good gift. For baseball, I'm a right-handed hitter, but for hockey, I could use the stick on both sides. It was a little difficult if you had a curved stick, but it was a bit of an advantage. And so I was pretty confident in my sports abilities when I was younger, and I did enjoy hockey until my first goal. And that was in grade 8. I'll never forget. I still remember it was on a stage, and we had the hockey net set up on the other opposite ends of the stage. And I had the ball. We were playing with a ball, and I was going to take a slap shot. And as I wound up, I hit the ball backwards into my own net. And so you can imagine after that, head low, as a party, I can't believe what you did. You lost it. Wow. And you become known for that. And so, I've played hockey since, but it hasn't been at the top of my list of things to do. Now, I say that because most of us, we all have our moments in life, some embarrassing stories or something. Most of us will do whatever we can to avoid embarrassment, to avoid being seen. Something like that, all eyes are on you. Can't avoid that. We like the opposite. We like to be noticed. We like to be popular. Some people, they will strive for fame. We like attention. Now, those are the things. People go to great lengths to be noticed and to get the attention of others. But we'll also go to great lengths to not get attention for some of the things that maybe make us look bad, right? We'll do whatever we can to avoid it. And I say that because last week we looked at the story of Judas, and around the final hours of Jesus' life. But we really didn't talk a lot about Peter, because the Bible does. The Bible talks a lot about Peter that night. Both Judas and Peter failed Jesus. Judas betrayed him, but Peter, this confident Peter who was known as the Rock and who he did so many things in his life and his early life with Jesus that even the others, he was the first one to do things and often the only one. And yet he had a great moment of failure, a moment where all eyes were on him, wondering what he was going to do. So I want you to consider Peter this morning. I want us to take a look at Peter. Peter, his life journey begins, he's a fisherman up in Galilee. Really, he's a nobody. He's a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, and, he was from the little fishing town, Capernaum. And Jesus called him, and that changed his life. Changed all of our lives. His journey, though, didn't take just a week or a month or even the 3 years that he walked with Jesus. His journey of faith, his discipleship journey, took more than 30 years, 35 plus years. And so this is a little picture of the journey that we're going to quickly go through this morning with Peter. And as we're looking at the early life of Peter, and you look at his early stages, he was the first one, as we see, he was the first one he was called by Jesus. He stepped out of the boat in faith. Not just the first one, the only one. He walked on the water. And then he got scared and he began to sink. He openly confessed Jesus as the Messiah. And he also was having his feet washed by Jesus, and he said, "No way. You might wash their feet, you are not washing mine." And Jesus said, "Unless I wash your feet, you have no part in me." And he says, "Well, then wash my hands and my head as well." He says, "Just your feet are good, Peter." Peter was also one of the few that saw his glory up on the mountain when Jesus was transfigured, and he was terrified. And again, Jesus reached out to comfort him. And Peter also had his moment of failure. But Peter was so confident that he would not fail Jesus. He looked at his life, he walked on the water, he confessed him as Messiah. All these things Peter did. And when Jesus said, "Peter, you will deny me," Peter said, Lord, even if everyone else denies you, I will not. There's no way that will happen. You can just imagine Peter saying, you're crazy. This will never happen. This is impossible. Even if everyone else does, I never will. And then he says again, even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. I would rather die than deny you. This is not going to happen, Jesus. Now we would think, Peter, don't you know Jesus? He's the guy that walked on the water. He multiplied the food. You've watched him raise the dead. He knows better. If he says you're going to deny him, don't you think he knows better? When Jesus says, try the other side when you first met him, you're out fishing and Jesus says, cast your nets on the other side. Lord, we've been out all night. Okay, I'll do it. Remember that, Peter? Surely you should trust that you will deny Jesus. No way. Because that is something that was, it was in his heart. How could I ever? I don't even want to let this guy wash my feet. I am not going to deny my Lord. And then comes that fateful night. Because Jesus predicted that he was going to deny, that Peter would deny Jesus. And when the rooster crowed 3 times. So let's go to that night. I want to bring you to that night where Jesus is on trial. Jesus has been taken to the house of the father-in-law of the high priest, and then the high priest himself sees Jesus, and the soldiers have been making fun of him and beating him, and Jesus is on this illegal trial at night. They don't want to do it during the day because the people might stop it from happening. So let's do it during the night when it's not even legal. So there they are. And Peter finds himself warming himself around the campfire. He got let in by John. And this is told in the other Gospels, and you can see some bits and pieces. I'm going to reference them, but you can look them up in the other Gospels to see the details. But John was known to the high priest. John was allowed in. And John talked to the servant girl at the gate and had Peter let in. And when Peter's in there, it's dark, but there's firelight. And around the firelight, I saw you with him. No, that wasn't me. Remember, we like popularity. We like to be known and to be accepted. And we will do almost anything to hide the bad. And Peter, he doesn't want, maybe he wants to not leave Jesus' side. We don't know exactly what was going on through his head, other than we know he denied Jesus 3 times. And so someone else says, certainly you were with him. You've even got a Galilean accent. You must be one of them. And we're told in another gospel that he called down a curse. He said, he swore, not a curse, he swore that it was not him. I swear, I never knew him. It's not me. And when that happens, the rooster crows. Now, I have Luke here, because Luke is the only one that highlights what happened next. Immediately when the rooster crows, something triggers in Peter's mind. I don't know about you, but there's certain things that trigger memories, songs. I don't know if I'm listening to a song and there's a song that has a certain memory, that will flood back in. Smells. I remember this once. My grandpa, he used to smoke a pipe, and I hadn't smelled a pipe in like 15 years. And one time I just smelled that same tobacco, the same pipe, and it brought me right back to sitting in Grandpa's living room. And I thought, wow, the power of these things. And this rooster, the sound of the rooster triggered Peter remembering what Jesus told him. But not only that, but somehow, whether Jesus was being led from one place to another, this is in the courtyard of the high priest's house. And so, here's when you're in the city, it's not like today. You don't have like a front yard and a backyard, and these houses are all tightly put together. But if you're wealthy, your house is big enough, you can have a bit of the outside in the middle of your home. It's built around this little yard. So this is a courtyard. And this is in the house of the high priest. And so there's a courtyard. On this bottom picture there, this is, this glass structure above just to protect it from the elements. But back then, the elements, when it rained, the rain would come down. But you could be outside, but still inside. And so there he is around this fire. And somehow, whether Jesus is being led or whether they could see Jesus in one of these other rooms on trial. But somehow we read, immediately when he was still speaking, the rooster crowed, and then Luke says, the Lord turned and looked directly at Peter. Can you imagine? This is Peter, who wanted to be by Jesus' side through the worst of times, who was willing to die for Jesus. And Jesus looks at you. And it's probably not a face of, I told you so. This would be a face of, oh, Peter. And you can imagine how Peter was just cut to his heart. So sad. You don't have to imagine it. Luke tells us that when he remembered the words of the Lord, he went outside. He left, and he wept bitterly. This is big, tough Peter, the fisherman, the one who's going to walk on water, the one who's going to step out in faith, the one who grabs the sword and cuts off the ear of the high priest, who's ready to die for Jesus, and he's a mess. But that's not the end of Peter's story. I mean, for Peter, maybe he felt it was. Because you got to remember, Peter now, he's used to, okay, I failed the Lord, I got to go show him and make up for this. I got to go show him that I'm his man, that I'm there for him. Except I can't. Because wherever Peter went that night, whatever Peter was wrestling with that night, by the time he's actually able to see Jesus, it's too late. Jesus is dead. And Peter thinks he doesn't have an opportunity to say sorry. Peter thinks it's over. I messed up. I can't believe it. Sometimes, though, we have to trust Jesus because Jesus knows better. And sometimes it's at those lowest points in our life, the lowest points in our journey, that God is actually doing some amazing work. Because Jesus knew it wasn't over for Peter. Jesus foretold the denial, but Jesus also knew that Peter had more to come. We need to expect the same. We're going to have difficult times. Just as Jesus told Peter, Peter, you're going to deny me. You're going to have a difficult time. Jesus tells us, you're going to have a difficult time. Now, we might not be denying Jesus, but we're going to have our days of trials, our days of trouble. Paul says this. Paul, when he went back to those churches that he planted, and he goes back and he says, as he writes we read this in the book of Acts, he says, he returned, encouraging them to continue in the faith and telling them it is necessary to go through many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. That's what he's telling the church. He's preaching this. Paul knew this. Peter understood this. Paul says again as he writes to Timothy, in fact, all who want to live a godly life in Jesus Christ will be persecuted. There's going to be trials. There's going to be troubles. You're going to find yourself maybe not at Jesus' trial, maybe at your own or at a brother or sister's. You're going to have some difficult times. And Jesus said, if they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. Peter understood this years later. You see, Peter's journey, he didn't give up like Judas. Peter got up, and Jesus had more in store, and Peter was able to see it. And Peter's able to write some 30 years or, 20, 30, 40, 50. So some 30 years later, Peter's writing, and Peter's reminding the church that you're being refined, that when you're going through difficult trials, you're being refined, that God is using you, God is allowing these things because he has his reasons. You have to trust him. Just like Peter, he had to trust that it wasn't the end, that there was more to come. And Peter also says, instead, rejoice that you share in the sufferings of Christ. So when you go through difficult times, don't worry, God is still there. Peter understood that. Peter reminds us of that. And Jesus knew there was more in store. So as we look at the journey of Peter, as you can see, as Jesus calls him, there's still a lot more to go. If you look at the timeline between 27 and 67, almost 40 years there, where Peter has been growing as a disciple. We looked at the first little bit of Peter's life. And then we see that Peter was a witness to the resurrection. He was restored by Jesus, empowered by the Spirit. He opened the doors to the kingdom. He was sent to the Gentiles. And he became an elder in the church and wrote letters that have changed not just the church then, but the church through all these centuries. This is where Jesus was. When Jesus was resurrected, he wasn't the first one to be told. The women were at the tomb. And the angel there at the tomb, the angel says to the women who came, go where he said, verse 7, go tell the disciples, and notice, and Peter. Go tell the disciples, don't forget Peter. Jesus knew that Peter was left in a really difficult place. Jesus knew that Peter had some real trouble. And then he says, he's going on ahead to Galilee. So it's a short time later, and you can't really read this probably from your distance, but it's color coordinated, and we're looking at 49 to 53 in the bottom corner, these little white dots. And so you'll see 49 is down in Jerusalem where he appears to them, and then he goes all the way up there to Galilee, where he appears to them up in Galilee, and then back down to Jerusalem. And while he's in Galilee, they're in their boats fishing. And Jesus is on the shore, and Peter recognizes him. Peter doesn't even wait for the boat to get to shore. He jumps out of the boat, and he runs to shore. And this is where he has this discussion with Jesus. Not only was Jesus there and resurrected and appeared to Peter, Jesus restored Peter. And I've said this before. He didn't say, Peter, you know what? You failed me. You're no longer going to be called Peter. I'm going to change your name. You're not a rock anymore. I'm going to call you Jello or something. He didn't do that. He didn't say, we're going to take back the keys I gave you. Your time's over now as a leader. Someone else can take your place as one of the 12. He didn't do that. He left Peter as a leader. He left Peter as the rock. He left Peter with the keys. And he reinstated him, said, do you love me? Just as Peter denied him 3 times, Jesus asks him 3 times, do you love me? Finally he says, Lord, you know I love you. Feed my lambs. And Peter, you're going to have a difficulty in life when you're older. Someone's going to lead you away, and you're going to have some trials and challenges. Peter writes about what he remembered Jesus telling him. Peter writes in 2 Peter, the last letter we have from Peter, I know that I will soon lay aside my tent, as the Lord Jesus Christ has indeed made clear to me. He knows that he's run this race. He knows that, he's got certain time, but it's not going to be easy. The end will not be easy for him. But he trusted the words of Jesus. He saw what Jesus did and how Jesus grew him over all those years. He remembered how low he was. And yet, Jesus was patient with him. Sometimes when we think about our lives, we think about the trials and the tests. And there's a few things that I want us to take away from this and remember from the life of Peter. First of all, during those trials and those darkest moments, don't forget what God can do. Don't think, well, God's not with me. I can't believe I failed him, or I can't believe he would let this happen. Some of the biggest characters in the Bible had challenging lives. Moses. He has to flee from Egypt, and he was rejected by... Moses went through such a hard time. And what about King David? Why is he on the run from Saul, and he has to live in a cave for years? And David had a hard time. What about Ruth? Well, why don't you skip all that famine and husbands dying and having to skimp off of food from the fields for years? Why don't you just skip ahead, let her meet Boaz right away? Why this tough life? What about Esther? She's fearing for her life that she might be killed by the king. And on, Daniel and Jeremiah, and on we can go about these great leaders in the faith that we read about today, But they did not have an easy life. They had dark, difficult times. And so don't think, when you face those dark difficulties, don't think God's left me. Don't be like Judas and give up. Remember what God did with Peter and just ask God, God, I don't understand why this is happening, but help me to see what you're going to do. Because God works for the good of all those who love him. We're promised that in Romans chapter 8:28. And so have faith that God is doing something and will do something. So the first thing is, and remember, Paul kind of writes about this. Paul's going through a real difficult time, and he's pleading for Jesus, take this away from me. And God says, my grace is sufficient for you. You got enough. I'm not taking this away. Because through your difficult times, my power is seen more clearly. My power is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul says he gets, he's like, bring on the weakness. I will gladly take it, because if that's what it takes for me to see your glory more, I will accept it. Second thing, don't forget, Jesus is with us. He says to the disciples, surely I'm with you always. Go make disciples, and don't forget, I'm always with you to the end of this age. You know, when Peter was in the boat, and he stepped out in faith, and he got scared and began to sink. Do you remember whose hand was there to lift him up? It was Jesus. And when he was terrified on the mountain, when Jesus was changed, do you remember who said, take courage? It was Jesus. And do you remember when, looking through Peter's life, after Jesus rises from the dead, he said, go tell the others and Peter. Jesus was reminding him that. Meet me in Galilee. Who reinstates Peter. Who says, wait in the city for the gift I promised you. Jesus is there all along. Even when he's in prison. The angel was sent and he was set free. The angel didn't say, run for your life. The angel said, go back out in the street and preach. He said, what? You just freed me. Can't you tell me to go into hiding? No. Go right back out. But he knew that God was with him this whole time. Don't forget that. Number 3, be patient with others. Listen, if after 3 years of being with Jesus every day, we're talking about making disciples, right? Who's the best at disciple makers? Jesus. And after 3 years of these guys being with Jesus every day, do you remember why he had to wash their feet? Because they were arguing about who's the greatest. I mean, after 3 years. And after 3 years, you'd think Peter would be so strong that he wouldn't deny Jesus. Jesus even prayed for him. If it takes that much effort and time, even for Jesus, 30 years for Peter to become an elder, don't think that you're going to make a disciple in a week and they're going to become some elder and so great in a month. Give people grace and mercy and be patient. As we make disciples, have some patience with one another. Remember that, it's not our church. Paul says, as he writes to Timothy, he says, preach the word. Be ready in season and out of season. Correct people, rebuke them, encourage them with great patience and careful instruction. Often we don't have patience. If Peter was one of the disciples that we helped make Peter disciple, hey, that's great, you're a believer now, and Peter did something really discouraging and disappointing. Peter, we have to go and have a talk here. You're going to have to leave church for a short time. We'll try and bring you back later if you're not destroyed by Satan by then. We don't do that. We're patient and merciful. I'm not saying there's never a time for disfellowship. I'm not saying that. But the lines we draw in the sand, sometimes they're so simple. We're like, I can't believe that you did X, Y, or Z, and we have no grace and mercy for one another. Mercy triumphs over judgment, we're told. And if we want mercy from God, we need to be merciful to others. And so, remember that we're on a journey. Don't be so hard on ourselves and don't be so hard on others. Remember that we're on a journey and that God is working through our weakness. And that if we have the right heart and we're willing to get up and dust ourselves off, then we are forgiven. And remember that God's got great plans for us. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. You know, when you have this pottery and the pottery's broken and God can do wonderful things even with broken pottery. And I want to make another analogy to that because there's an art, Japanese art, it's called kintsugi. I don't know if I did that. I butchered that, I'm sure. I apologize to anyone who speaks Japanese. But anyways, the point is, when pottery is broken, what they do is, it's called golden repair. And they'll take some gold dust or some silver and they mix it in with this glue, and they'll put these pots back together and they make them into art. And people actually, they'll break them on purpose now, you know, so that they can put them together, make a lot of money, right? So, I mean, this is an art. But I wanted to bring this up because when you feel that you've been broken, when you feel that you're not able to be used, that you've messed up so bad, don't forget what God is able to do. Imagine how God sees you, not as a broken piece, but as a fine piece of art made in His image that God will use for glorious things if we allow it. Let's stand as we sing our final hymn.